Hello. We spent a few minutes looking at, and actually some more time shooting in a shallow depth of field. So now we're going to move on to step 2 of the assignment, which is looking at a wide, deep depth of field, or something that I call a storytelling depth of field. And you achieve that by having a tight aperture. So something at f, maybe f9.5 or above, generally f11, somewhere above that. You would really want to focus on having a wider angle lens, a small aperture, and keeping some distance from your subject and the background and stuff so that they're all easier to keep in focus. Remember that the smaller the aperture, the wider your depth of field gets. That means the distance between what's in focus and what is not in focus, the distance of stuff that is in focus becomes larger. So what we're going to do right now is take a quick look at a couple of photos that have that wide, deep depth of field, that storytelling depth of field, where your eye can go all through the picture and see from the close stuff near the foreground into the middle distance into the background. And that idea of the storytelling depth of field, that came to, I got that from a book called Understanding Exposure by, I believe, Brian Peterson, which is the first book on photography I ever read. And he said there's 3 real apertures or depths of field that you would play with. There's the shallow depth of field for portraits. There's the who cares depth of field, where there is no 3-dimensionality, like you're shooting something that's 2D, like a flat light kind of picture, or somebody standing against a wall, and you just want maximum sharpness. And then there's the storytelling depth of field, where the picture is really 3-dimensional and you're going through it. So let's take a look at some of those 3D storytelling kind of depth pictures right up here. The first one is something that I shot myself a couple of weeks ago on Flying Mountain in Maine in Acadia National Park. So if you see there's me in the red. If you can't make it good, make it red. That's a compositional trick. Red always sticks out. And you can see there's a clear kind of 3 levels in the picture. There's like the foreground is that first kind of triangle. Oh, let me just mouse over that. Maybe that'll show. This area here is foreground, and then you've got this middle distance down here with the field, and then the ocean and all the stuff is in the background. All of it is sharp and in focus. If you zoom in, you can see, like, if you were to make a big print of this, it would work. People wouldn't say like, oh yeah, but that part's blurry. And that's 1/30th of a second at f13, ISO 100. The next one, 1/15th of a second. So I had to shoot a couple of these, making sure that my hand was still enough not to get any kind of motion blur. But again, you've got, this is the foreground down here with the darker grass, and then it's going leading you down to the red barn roof, the rusty roof, and then the sun is still hitting the mountains or the hills in the back. So it's sharp all the way through, and that's the key that we're looking for, is that idea that everything's in focus, so therefore everything in the frame matters. It's much harder, to my mind, to shoot a wide angle, deep depth of field kind of picture. Ansel Adams, the club that he started with some of his photographer buddies back in the day, you probably know his black and white national park photos of Yosemite and stuff like that. He's one of the most famous photographers basically of all time. It was called the F64 Club. The F64 was the important part. The idea being that if you could really get F64, you get everything in focus. So he really liked that. Again, this is 1/60th of a second, f16. The lens I'm using is a 35mm prime lens that maximum aperture is f16. So I've got all that maxed out, ISO 100, so I get my best colors. And the trees down here in the foreground are in focus. The trees in the middle ground are in focus. And then all the way back here into the background and the fog and stuff, it all goes through. Everything works there. So, and it's got pretty light, the sun just coming from there, and it's very soft, and I like that picture. I was pleased with that, even though I had to climb up a mountain at 5 in the morning to get it. Same idea, f16 again, 1/80th of a second. It's later in the day, so I got a little bit more light to play with, and we've got rocks here, and then the waves, and all of it is in focus. Some of it you can't tell as much because the fog is starting to blur it out. These are blurry drops of water from the wave crashing in. Oops, let's go back. Yeah. If you're noticing a pattern, these are all shot at f16 pretty much, or almost all of them. When I want to get everything in focus, that's the easiest thing to do. If shooting at f16 doesn't cut it, then you got to take multiple pictures and stack them together, which is getting a little bit more advanced. But with this, you've got the rocks in the foreground and the reflection of the sunset, and it goes straight through. The trees are basically in focus too. When you stop your aperture all the way down to 16 or whatever your maximum is, you also get these rays if you shoot into the sun, the sunbursts. So and it looks different depending on how many blades are in your aperture, but just know that if you stop it down, you shoot into the sun, you'll get that kind of cool effect. 1/20th of a second, f11, ISO 100, so not f16, but still, it looks like pretty much everything is in focus here. So sometimes it's just, you use the maximum aperture you need to get everything in focus. And if you don't have to go to f16, don't, because you're not going to, at that point, you're not getting diffraction, which actually cuts out maybe everything's in focus, but it's not as sharp as it could be. For the most part, I don't really worry about diffraction. I feel like you sharpen it back in post, and like only nerds are really going to notice that. Most people, if it's a beautiful picture, they're not going to say, but it's 95% as sharp as it could be. If you had that extra 5%, it would really be a great shot. Like, you'll find internet trolls that will do that, but who cares what they think? And then last one, this is Little Long Pond. This was with an 85 millimeter lens. The other ones were all with a 35 millimeter. But again, I'm at f16, ISO 280, because this is right in the sunrise, 1/15th of a second, which is about as slow as I can hand hold it. And you've got sharp reeds in the foreground, and then it's not quite as sharp in the background, because with an 85 millimeter, that's going to start cutting into your depth of field a little bit, but it's still what I would call acceptably sharp there. And it takes you right through the whole picture. You've got this whole, it leads you right through into this little gap here, and there's the clouds and the fog on the mountain and all that stuff. So that's the basics of this kind of storytelling aperture and a deep depth of field. Tamp that aperture down, stop it down as much as by making the number as high as possible, f16, 22, some 30 something, and then keep your shutter speed as fast as you need to make it to make sure that you don't get motion blur, and then just adjust your ISO to make sure that the exposure comes out the way that you want it to. So check out the next video that shows you how I shot a couple of pictures, not these ones, but I went out and shot some of these same kinds of images in Illinois, and that'll walk you through the process for your own shots for the assignment. All right, good luck.